Today, we get to talk with an acquaintance of mine, Emily French. She is an amazing mother, amazing wife. She is well educated, not just in life, but in terms of personal growth, wholeness, and well-being, because it is absolutely a passion and desire of hers. She recently wrote an ebook called Run for Your Life, and she just started a podcast called Becoming Me. And so I wanted to invite her on the show today to talk a little bit about her book, as well as the podcast, but just the idea of the whole person concept and what she's learned in her life experience through the process. And when I think about Emily, the phrase that I think that comes to mind is an ordinary person who's doing extraordinary things. And so, Emily, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much. That was a really wonderful introduction. I appreciate that.
Bet.
Yeah.
Did your mic turn off by chance?
Is it on now?
It's on now.
Oh my goodness. So should I say that again?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Appreciate that.
You bet. My pleasure. So, let's just jump into it here. You just recently wrote your first ebook called Run for Your Life. And, I skimmed over some of the lessons that you talked about on your video and everything. And it just intrigued me, which is why I wanted to bring you onto the show. Just kind of go over your book a little bit, and then we'll just kind of go from there and talk about some questions that come up.
Sure. Well, I've been an athlete my whole life, and running has always been a part of what I've had to do. And partially because I was a soccer player, and so it's like you're always trying to stay in shape for soccer. But then as I got older and as you start having children, it starts to become, you realize exercise starts to become essential for like your mental health. And so one of my good friends and I, we both love the t-shirt that says I run because it's cheaper than therapy. And we both felt like that's kind of our little mantra, like that I get to a place where running is the way that I make sure that mentally I am the best that I can be for my family, for my job. And now when I talk about it to people, I say it's actually a very spiritual process for me, that running has become kind of like my sanctuary.
That's interesting. And just a side note, just to show how dedicated she was to soccer, her parents built a soccer field with 2 goals in the backyard. And I'm not talking about just, a small backyard, a small soccer. Like, these were legit soccer goals, legit field where you could have team practices on. So I'm just saying.
That sounds like I was so spoiled. That actually came like all after me, Evan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what sibling got it then?
Well, my youngest sister who doesn't play soccer.
That's funny.
It is funny. But my older brother, my older sister, and I, we all played. And my older sister and I both had the privilege of playing in college. So that was, but it's funny that came after us. Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I mean, we would have been all stars if that would have been our backyard.
That's hilarious. So Anne never really played soccer, but she got the soccer field.
She played for a little bit, and I think they even young, when she was young. And I think they even had her team use the field for practice sometimes and stuff. So it was used and the community used it. Other teams came and used it. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's funny. So in terms of running became a sanctuary, a place of peacefulness, mindfulness, and meditation, I think sometimes in life we miss out on those things because we get too busy, or we don't take time to separate for ourselves, for recovery, for wholeness, for meditation. And, I think for me, that's an area that I've probably struggle in, is creating a spot to just zone out and recover. I typically do that on my phone away from my family, but that tends to hurt my family time. And so, it used to be I would get up early in the morning, like 4 a.m., and that used to be my time. But then, because of kids, that's not always doable because they wake up in the middle of the night multiple times.
Right.
What advice would you give someone or even to me, about how to create a space to essentially a safe place, a sanctuary to restore your soul, to restore your mind and your emotions?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I think moms deal with this so much because when they start raising children, like you just mentioned, or even it can be someone who's just single and they're busy and they fill their schedule up, I think we've typically looked at spiritual disciplines in a very narrow way, or even taking care of ourself can sometimes be labeled like selfish, or, I've had a lot of people in the Christian arena women really struggle with this idea of, self-care, and they just hate that word. But one of the things that I've had to realize, and it's helpful because my husband is a therapist, so he's super supportive, but that I just stink at life and at loving and at functioning if my soul is not well. And I think that's all of us. Like, if your soul is sick, then you will be sick. Like, that's all there is to it. And so I think one way is to reevaluate some of our beliefs around, like, what do I think I need to do, or what have I been taught, or what are my frameworks? So for example, a lot of times we think the only way to be a good disciplined person is I wake up early and I do this, this, and this. Well, all of a sudden, when you fail at those things, or you can't do those things that we think were bad, or we can't be healthy. Well, for me, I'm an artist. I'm very eclectic. I am not a morning person. I'm a night person. And so in the night is where I feel creative and where I feel more energized. And yet, so I've had to, first of all, know myself, and then also figure out within my daily life, how can I make sure that I am actually creating a life that I want to live? So for example, I do not have the same practice every day for, say, my spirituality and my mental health. It changes, and it changes with seasons, and it changes with what I'm really interested in during that time. And I think sometimes we can get trapped thinking that there's only one way that it can look, and it can look very different. So for example, I said running is kind of like my sanctuary. There was probably a good year where I just used that time, and I would play a podcast, I'd play a sermon, I'd play whatever, and I would just be like I was just feeding while I was running. But now I've hit a place where I feel like I have no more capacity to intake, and I need to be outputting. So it's like I've taken in as much as I can, and now I'm just like creating, I'm pushing the other direction. And so now I'm not listening to stuff on my run, except for listening for like what my internal voice is saying, if that makes sense. So like trying to create space within myself to hear. So it looks different. It can look different. And I think we have to free ourselves of guilt and unnecessary belief systems that keep us trapped. So,
you were talking about being regimented in the mornings and how when you don't accomplish those things, if you don't do them, you feel bad about yourself. That's the camp I park my tent at, because, I want to get up early. I want to pray. I want to devo. I want to write. I want to do all these things before anyone else wakes up, before anything is required of me. That's typically like the it zone. And I did really well at it for a while until one of my children had a hard time sleeping at night. So I gave myself grace. Like, okay, I just won't wake up super early because I'm up 3 times a night right now. But then I have not developed that habit again. And, I'm not really drinking caffeinated beverages, so I'm not drinking coffee anymore. And so all these things play into not waking up, super early. and then feeling bad about myself and then not creating that space or finding a place and time to do those things. And so what advice would you give me in the context of just figuring out how to create space and what that would look like now, because my time is different. We just had another child. So 2 weeks ago. So like, just everything's different.
I totally hear you. I do. I just actually did a training with a group. So in my everyday life, I work in leadership development, and I just did a training with a group, and I challenged them on some of these belief systems we have. One of them being our spiritual beliefs, and like that we've been taught that this formula is what it looks like to create a good spiritual life. Or if you do X, Y, and Z, then bravo, you can check your boxes, you get your A+ for the day. Well, my husband is like a morning person. It doesn't matter what time he goes to sleep. He will wake up at the same time every single day. I am like completely the opposite. Like there's a certain point of the night where it's like I cannot fall asleep unless it's like 11. Like I can't get to sleep any earlier than that, even if I wanted to. And so if you asked him to stay up past 11 o'clock, he would struggle so bad. But we don't look at him and say, you are so lazy that you will not stay up past 11 o'clock. What is wrong with you?
Right.
But there's somewhere we've been taught that that's what's acceptable, right? And so then we just internalize it. And so what I would recommend is, first of all, to confront some of those belief systems is the first thing. Like, what am I believing that I've created this framework that tells me if I'm being a good person or not? Like, what have I created? The other thing is we have really, really discounted the idea that being a parent is also completely spiritual. And like, as you are parenting, as you are sacrificing yourself, as you're laying your life down for your children and your kids, that somehow that's not spiritual, but if you got up and read your Bible in the morning, that is. So again, we've created like this spiritual framework that says this makes you a good Christian or a good spiritual practicing man of God, whatever, and this doesn't. And that's not true, and actually through our parenting, we are being transformed, and think about how God uses our children and the lessons that he can teach us as we are learning to lay our life down for someone else. So those are two things.
As you're talking, I'm seeing these paradigms in my own life, and kind of reiterating what you're saying is I've created in my life this idea of what success looks like in terms of disciplines, waking up early, praying, reading, writing, doing all those disciplines. But I've discounted the father aspect. I've discounted other things that require my attention, that require my energy. And I think it's because we have this idea about ourselves that might be unrealistic of what success should look like every day in our lives. And, I don't know what other people are like, but when I think about success, I have the one I want to believe in my heart, which is if I am dirt broke poor when I die, but my kids are in heaven, that is success. I lived a successful life. Like at the end of my life, that's all I care about. And then there's my head that tells me, well, success is, financial stability. Success is, putting all your kids through college and being debt free. And I mean, those are things of success, but and then we weigh ourselves against the desires of our heart, which are those things, but we're weighing it based off of where we're currently at. And then I feel like that demotivates us to not strive. And so I don't know, I'm just talking out loud here.
That's okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's all those different pieces that we're constantly battling against. And something I was thinking as you were speaking is, this is so hard because this is it speaks to our culture. Like, it speaks to what we've created. So we don't live in villages anymore, right? Like, and everything is placed on you and your wife. So in other cultures, they've actually figured this out a lot better than we have. So we're driven by the dollar, right? We work super hard to make our money. There's other cultures where there's other things that are more important, but also they like have better supporting systems for the family. So right now on your shoulders is providing for your family, helping take care of your wife, helping take care of your newborn baby, like all this stuff. And you're trying to make sure you're getting your spiritual disciplines stuck in there and eat healthy and exercise, like all these things. And my husband and I, we just went to Kenya recently. And in Kenya, if you have any kind of money, also I know it's very popular in other regions as well. Like we have some friends who are in Ethiopia. You have house help. You have people that come and they help you in your house. And I'm like, I want house help. I want to pay people to help me in my house. They have people that help with kids. They have people that help with meals, all these different things, because it's insane to think that just two people can bear the burden that we put on each other here in the United States. It's crazy.
Yeah, I would love house help. that would be, it's the same when I went to Uganda. So very, very similar. In your book, there was this part where you're talking about a snake on the trail and you're always looking for snakes. Share that story and kind of the lessons that came out of that specific environment.
Sure. Well, that's one of my most recent lessons. So actually, I'm going to write a sequel. So the first one is Run for Your Life. The next one is going to be There's Snakes on the Trail, or Run for Your Life, There's Snakes on the Trail, something like that. And it's coming out of these lessons because there's been so many snakes on the trail recently. But this original thought came, I was running one day and I came around a corner and it's this area where there's a lot of water and it goes on both sides of the trail. And there was a lady standing there and she was just like had her hand out. And when you're running, I couldn't just run by her. So of course I stopped and see what she's, pointing at. And this little pond was just full of snakes. It was so gross. And the more I've thought about it, she said, I think a mom just had babies, but they were like so big. I don't see how they could be babies. So now I've been pondering, I wonder if they all met to like mate or something, because there was like so many snakes. Okay.
A cesspool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I had never seen anything like it. They were just all slithering all over each other and stuff. So up until that point, I've been running on this trail for 20 years and I'd only ever seen one snake in 20 years and felt really fortunate about that. So then after that day, I was just like, oh no, like I'm ruined. Like every time I run past this area, I'm just like scanning the ground, looking so carefully because I knew they were going to have to move out of this really small pond. And sure enough, like they start coming. And it's pretty soon where I'm seeing a little one, a baby one, a mommy one as I'm running by. Even in the last few days, I've been seeing little babies all over. And this has been a couple months now since that happened. But as I run, I just, like I said, I create space inside of myself and my heart to hear from the Spirit of God and to hear what he's trying to teach me. And so as I run, I like hear these little lessons, and I feel like he teaches me these little lessons. So that's what the book is. It's just these little things that as I've run, the Lord has taught me lessons. And so with this one, I was thinking about these snakes and what they might represent in our life. And after that pond filled up with snakes, soon the season changed and the water all dried up. And so at first, I was thinking about how every time I would run by that pond, I would be so scared because I would be afraid a snake would come. I'm still very cautious. But once I saw the water dry up, I could see the snakes were gone. And so that lesson that the Lord started teaching me there was about the things in our lives that become almost like snakes, like they scare us, they sneak up on us, they may have been something that was true that happened in our past. And somehow every time we get near something that might even feel or replicate what that snake was in our life, we get so scared and we might have the same reactions. And so I talk about how when that water dried up, how that became true as well, and how there was now a new truth that I needed to hold on to, and that truth was just as true as the first one, but that now I could actually maybe stop feeding that fear and feeding that thought, and hold on to the truth that the water is now gone.
So what snakes do you feel like God has pointed out in your own life that aren't no longer, you know, I'm from Oklahoma, when you aren't no longer, oh man.
Yeah.
That are not there anymore.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's ever going to be that they're not there anymore, because we're human, but we can grow, and we can, so for example, that pond dried up, and I could be like, okay, man, I don't have to be as nervous about these snakes. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to run into a snake again. You know, so for example, we grow, right? But that doesn't mean that one of our issues all of a sudden will completely evaporate and we will never deal with it again. But you deal with it differently, and you deal with it maybe from a more mature place. And so for example, one of my biggest snakes is like, you're not enough. And it was partially, you can go all the way back to like childhood, you know, and things like that, where we kind of hold on to these little things that have happened in our past, or big things that have happened. And then we start creating stories around that. And so for me, dealing with not being enough was also connected to like, if I'm good enough, then. So that would be like in my behavior, it could be in work, it could be in performance, it could be whatever. Like, if I'm good enough, then you'll love me. If I'm good enough, then you won't hurt me. If I'm good enough, you know. And so that is a snake that I have to watch out for, because if I don't identify it, if I let it sneak in, it will cause self-sabotage. Mm-hmm.
You know, something that you talked about that I don't want to pass over is when you run, you used to listen to stuff, you used to get fed, but now you've created a space to be quiet, to hear from God. Mm-hmm. I don't know how normal it is for other people to hear God or not. I know from a young age, I feel like God has spoken to me, and I've consistently been able to hear his voice. Mm-hmm. And then one day someone's like, yeah, Evan, that's not normal. Like, people don't hear God's voice. And I've always thought about, well, why don't people hear God's voice? Mm-hmm. And because I think as a believer, or someone who wants to believe in God, that would be something that they would want, is the ability to hear God's voice. Mm-hmm. I think there's multiple ways we could answer this, but how do we, I don't want to say create space or room, but how do we become attentive to hear God? Mm-hmm. So that when he is speaking to us, we will listen.
Yeah, that's so good. Just in the last few years, I had this kind of enlightened idea, realization that I wanted to be better at hearing that voice. And one thing that I think is just like such a practical first step is, have you ever had that moment where, for example, you're about to go do something and something tells you, grab your keys right now.
Yeah.
And then you don't do it. You're like, oh, I'll get it. I'll do it in a minute or whatever. And you don't do it. And then all of a sudden, like the next day you forgot to grab your keys and you're here and you didn't, and you're like, why didn't I do it when I just had that urge? That happened to me too many times where I didn't listen. And I was like, I'm going to start listening to even that little tiny thing that seems insignificant. And as I listen and act on that, then I'm going to expect that when it's like big things, when it's important things, that same voice is going to be speaking to me. And so I think taking that first practical, first step is to make sure that when we hear that little tiny voice inside of us that we think is insignificant, that we actually act on it, follow it, listen to it, and then see what happens. Because for me, I feel like if it's almost like practicing listening to that voice. And even when we talk about, the voice of God, I think the Bible tells us if we actually heard his voice, we might die. But I still believe that the Spirit is alive inside of me. And so I believe that there is a voice that is the deceiver and that tells me I'm not enough. And then I believe there's another voice inside too. And I believe a lot of times they're at war with each other. And so, first of all, creating space to listen is hard, but it also means a lot of intentionality about what am I going to allow to have my attention, which ultimately means what am I going to allow to have my life. But then also creating the willingness to listen to that small voice and to battle the other voice. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because in those small areas, you said the word practice, and I think like anything, like a father teaches their children anything. There's, I wouldn't just give my son a miter saw and say, hey, go learn. Before he can use a miter saw, I need to teach him how to hold a nail and hammer. I need to teach him how to draw a straight line. I need to teach him how to use a hand screwdriver before I let him use the drill, so he works his way up. And I think you're right. I think God does that with us in many ways, because, I look at my life and we both grew up in the church, and I believe kind of within the same type of denomination and everything. And there have been many times in my life where I heard that still small voice, and it actually saved my life multiple times. I remember I was probably in 8th grade, four-wheeling, and I didn't have a helmet on, and I heard, put your helmet on. I went around the track, didn't do it, put your helmet on. Went around the track, didn't do it, put your helmet on. And then I'm like, well, if this is God's voice, he's probably not going to ask me a 4th time. I'll just go put my helmet on. And I kid you not, the next time around the track, I got in a pretty bad four-wheeler accident. And I was lucky to be able to walk away with minor scrapes and bruises and stuff. But it would have been a different story, because the four-wheeler actually rolled over my head.
Oh,
had I not had the helmet on, I probably would have crushed my skull in.
Yeah.
And there's countless stories that I could share. But then I've even had friends who didn't hear God's voice, and it cost them their lives. I can point to 4 people in one accident that I believe God revealed himself to them in advance. And I have confirmation that he did. He brought it to light, but they still decided to go on a plane trip. My friend was a pilot. The plane crashed, and all but one person on board died.
Wow.
And two of my best friends were on that plane. And so I've seen people who disregarded that, and those are both extremes,
right,
of consequences versus. But even in the small things, God cares about the small things, and if we can't listen to God in the small things, we won't be able to listen to God in the big things. So I really liked what you're saying about the keys, about grab an extra water bottle, or don't go down this road, just go the long way, or whatever it is. So I don't know.
I think we'll start when you start following that intuition, that still small voice, when you start following it and then you watch, you're like, oh my gosh, this is why I needed this. This is why I grabbed that extra water bottle. Oh my gosh, and you like start seeing that there's something about the Spirit of God that, is everywhere, omnipresent, not confined by time, space, is in you, is in me, that connects us all, like that we're so intricately connected. Like you start to become amazed at how active that Spirit is.
Well, that's a great point, because as you practice that, not only are you going to start to recognize it in more places, like how you develop it, but then like practicing any sport or any instrument, you gain more confidence. And the more confidence you gain, the better ability that you end up having to be cognizant of that ability. And then that goes into decision making. When my wife and I chose where we wanted to live, it's because we listened to God's voice. When we decided to do ministry or not do ministry, it was based off of whether us trying to hear God's voice. And so there, in practical application, then there are times in my life that I trusted that I was hearing God's voice to do or not to do something that has real world results. And then it doesn't make you feel like you're going through life alone. That you do have a creator that you can lean on to seek advice and guidance. Now, does that mean every decision I've ever made, I've heard God's voice accurately? No, it does not. There's a lot of decisions I made that I thought I heard was God's voice, and it was me being stupid.
Yeah.
There's a fine line between those two. There really is sometimes. But no, I really like what you're saying.
And I would want to be careful, just to, like you said, even when we're saying use God's voice, that's such a very Christian, thing to say, almost to the point where it can become cliche, where it's like, oh, listen for God's voice, hear God's voice, where you've heard it so many times, you're like, well, what does that really mean? And like you're saying, people are like, well, I don't know if I ever hear God's voice, And for me, even just recently, oh my gosh, just very, very recently, I got presented with like 2 really great opportunities. And I'm thinking, which one do I do? I don't know. Which one is it going to be? And your brain starts going and you're like, okay, God, show me, give me the answer. Right. And I can almost guarantee that never is God going to be like, yes, no. You know what I mean? Like, this is my answer. And you hear it loud and clear. Yes, no. But for me, what I believe is, as you walk, the path becomes clear. Like, that's all there is to it. And it's one step at a time. Like, all he's promised us is manna, like bread today. That's it. Like, I will give you what you need today. And that you don't have to worry about tomorrow. Why even be anxious about tomorrow? Because I'm taking care of you. And so I believe it's as you walk that each step just becomes clear. And sometimes we get paralyzed to even take the step, but I think as you take each step, the next step becomes clear. And that's the way I live my life.
Yeah. What is another meaningful lesson that came out of this book, Run for Your Life, and this time with God?
Well, I'll just piggyback on what I was just saying. This is kind of a silly lesson, but it's so practical, and people that have read the book, this is the one that normally they say stands out to them. But it was called Don't Move Unless You Have to. And I was actually watching a movie. I think it was a James Bond movie. And there was a point where they were about to go underwater, and they had this like oxygen tank, and it only had so much oxygen. And so I think they were taking a breath, and then they had to get like down to some sort of secret layer, they were gonna like go in. So, but they had to hold their breath for a really long time. And I just remember one of the characters says to the other one, "Don't move unless you have to. It's just so you'll just waste your oxygen." And so as I would run, and as I was preparing for some races and stuff, runners know that like once you get in your rhythm, like you do not want to have to be moving. You don't want to have to go over obstacles. Like you just want to get in your little zone and keep moving. And so I started thinking about that concept of like how unnecessary movement, actually you lose like a ton of energy. Like you waste energy, and you waste needed like momentum. And so I was thinking about that one day as I was running, and I'm like doing some hills, and I'm just like, don't move unless you have to, like telling myself. And I started thinking about what that means in life. And for example, when I had these like two opportunities present themselves, unnecessary movement is spinning mentally to figure it all out, trying to analyze every little situation, doing all stuff that end just be like a giant waste of energy, where if I just was still, took my next step, and I only moved if I had to. And that, I think you can take that concept into so many different areas of life. And so that has been something, and it's going to be a reoccurring lesson that I'm going to have to keep learning, because I'm an activator. I'm like, let's get this job done. Let's do this. And I want to go after things with a lot of drive, but I can waste a lot of time if I move too soon.
Yeah. I've had a lot of people on here, and one of the general themes is like, you do have to be active. You do have to. So for example, I want to be in full-time ministry, and I'm not 100% sure what that would look like at this point. I thought I had an idea, but every time I tried to make that happen, it just fell flat on its face.
Mm-hmm.
And now, through some pretty specific events that have happened, I've kind of had a thus saith the Lord moment, be still, do nothing. And when it's time, I'm actually just going to open the door, and you're going to walk through it. So you don't have to go create it and stop trying.
Yeah.
Because before, I always tried to get out and go do it. I always tried to get out in front of God, And so the idea is like, well, you have to be moving. You have to be active. You have to be, and here I am, like God saying, nope, I don't want you to do anything. I want you to sit. I want you to be still. And I feel like that, even culturally, that's very at war.
Yes.
Because a lot of it's like based on like you need to make this happen. And I'm thinking like, I can't. It hasn't happened before. Right. I failed many times, but if this is God, then it's obviously going to have to be in his timing, or else it's not going to work. And so there's this idea, if you're being still, you're not doing anything, which I believed was a lot. Yeah, I just believed it for so long that you have to be moving, until I realized like, no, actually being still and doing nothing can be exactly the hardest thing. And trusting God, which it has been.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so good. And I'm right there with you. Even in the last 2 years, I feel like I've been like underground. So up until that point, so my undergrad is in church music. So I've been like in music ministry for years and years. And my husband and I moved to Florida in 2017. for about 2 years. And previous to that, I was on staff at a church as a music minister. We moved there. We moved there to help with his friend's church plant. And I was a music minister there for about a year and a half before we moved back. And then we moved back to Oklahoma. And like I said, I feel like I've been underground for 2 years. And I finally got to the place about 3 months ago, kind of middle of COVID, pandemic, where I just started feeling so like God has completely forgotten about me. Like I am off his list. Like I am not on his radar. And like you said, all of a sudden feel like, okay, feeling like, do I need to make something happen? Right. And so you start looking at jobs or searching around, why am I not in a church, Lord? Like, this is part of who I am. This is my gift to the world and to the body. Like, why am I not using this? And I don't ever really know or understand all of the timing, but I do know, like you said, the stillness and the space for your soul is so important. And in the busyness and in the machine of life, sometimes we all of a sudden our soul is not well. And like you can only be for other people, like you can only be the only good you are to other people is as good as you are inside. You know what I mean? Like your spiritual development, the person that you are becoming is all you have to offer. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden from October 1st to October 15th, I had 3 churches come to me asking me to be their music minister. Like I didn't apply for a job. I didn't find their job online, like they came to me. And so that was my final, I hope, one of my final big lessons from God that like, like just chill out, I got you. I'm sure it's not a final lesson, but it was a great reminder, like in the midst of when you just feel alone and in the dark and underground, that he's creating a space.
Well, and when I think biblically speaking, Joseph was in prison and he went from prison to second in command of all of Egypt.
Yeah.
Jacob, who was later renamed Israel, was tending sheep for his uncle.
Right.
Jonah was going the other direction.
Right.
Nehemiah was retreating.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus hung on a cross.
Mm-hmm.
All those things seem like they are going from the polar opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
But it was actually what ended up bringing them to the place that God had them.
Yeah. And seasons are so important. Seasons, time, something that I started holding on to was Jesus was only in ministry for 3 years. I was like, okay, God, like, is that it? Do we just get 3 years? And then, no, but I just was thinking like he prepared his whole life for 3 years. And so I started thinking about that, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? And that there are seasons. There are definitely seasons where you are put in different places for different reasons. And like one thing I've learned about myself is I'm really great at building things or like birthing things, like helping people build from the ground up. And so God has placed me in these different places where I help birth things. So sometimes I run into people who they've been at the same church or in the same job or, the same career path for decades or, and it's hard for me to understand that. And maybe even could feel like I was doing something wrong because I've been in places for shorter periods of time. But I think that God is showing me that there's a skill set that I have that can serve the body in a different way. And so in different seasons, I might be called to different places, and my life might look a lot different than someone else who has been a doctor their whole life, or whatever. Like that, we all have a different path.
I think COVID has taught a lot of people that, or they have it and they're just not realizing it because, knock on wood. And for anyone that might be experiencing difficulty, I'm really sorry. 2020 has been probably one of the best years of our lives for my wife and I that we've ever had together. Spiritually, financially, family. It's been a very good year. Despite COVID, despite all the crap that comes with that, it's been a really good year. Our 2019 was hell. Like, it was terrible. And
I'm with you.
It made me, it just made me like, it made me go, what the hell, God? Like,
Yeah.
how am I doing amazing in 2020, but my 2019 was terrible? And I just realized, like, what God did for me in 2019 actually prepared me a lot for 2020 and was doing a lot better. You know, my wife started working from home. I've been working from home. Our life looks different, and life in general looks different. But we're in this season of change in our country, both politically. You know, there's a lot of political turmoil. There's a lot of stuff with COVID around the world, and life looks different. And I think we measure life by only what we've experienced.
Yeah.
When actually there's been many pandemics before us. There's been many presidential heat issues before us. But we're so narrow-minded.
Yeah.
And don't have enough life experience to accurately and emotionally engage, like, oh, well, this is actually normal for history, but it's not normal in my life because I've never experienced it. And in terms of seasons, being cognizant of what that season is and what it looks like and what God is wanting to do. Because what he's wanting to do in 2019 isn't what he wanted to do in 2020 for us. You know, we had 7 major financial things that happened to my family in 2019 that was really difficult, really painful. We had 4 emergency room visits. I had 2 surgeries.
Wow.
I injured my knee, and then I also had an emergency appendectomy. We lost a pregnancy.
Wow.
Which is a lot of crap. It was terrible. It was, again, one of the most financially most difficult times in our life. And then, you know, this is kind of, you grew up in the church and in the same, again, denomination, but in September of last year, I heard God say, stop tithing. And I'm like, what? No, getteth behind me, Satan. Like, no, I'm not going to stop tithing. And I just kept hearing it over and over. And I'm like, but God, this would contradict the Bible. And just with more prayer, more talking to my pastor, I just came to the conclusion that, you know, we think this is of God, and God is bigger than his own precedents. And what I heard God say was, get out of debt, put money in savings, and be ready. Well, I mean, because of that, it allowed us to pay off a lot of debt fairly quick. And then when 2020 happened, even though we've done really well in 2020, there's about 3 or 4 months towards the beginning of COVID that weren't so great because there was a lot of scare. And so that wasn't that great for me in my career. But because I'm in the housing industry, and so, you know, mid COVID and after was fine, but at the beginning it slowed down a little bit because everyone was just kind of scared.
Right.
But I had planned, like my barns were full. The grain was there. And because I was able to listen to God in one season, it actually made room for great blessing in another. And in this year of time and preparation, you know, 2019 was a refiner's fire. 2020 has been building me back up. And then what 2021 is going to look like is probably going to be a lot different. Hey, maybe I'll be able to be used more. I don't know. But I think that's kind of like what we've been talking about with hearing God's voice and, you know, learning about the snakes that said you're not a good provider, you have to tithe, you have to do all these things. And there will be a season when we get back into to some of those things, but things change seasonally, and it's not always going to look different. So for example, like I don't need to beat myself up for not waking up at 4 a.m. when we have a baby that wakes up every 2 hours.
Right. Exactly.
There's seasons, and you need to learn how to adjust and flow in each season.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so right on. And just like when a vertebrae in your back gets out of alignment, I think that it's the same way if we don't quickly adjust to our current reality. So you will experience pain, you will experience uncomfortableness, you will experience maybe loads of condemnation, guilt. You'll start having all of these emotions if we don't adapt or adjust to our current reality. And so what you just described is exactly that. Like you have to get back in alignment and allow like your heart, your mind, your soul, your spirit, all things to be aligned. So your heart may want to get up and pray, but your body cannot because you have a newborn, and so bringing yourself back into alignment, and the quicker we can do that, the healthier that will be.
You said something that I loved that, the vertebrae being out. I was at a chiropractor a while back after one of the injuries. I think it was because, again, I had knee injury, but I had been so compensating for that one knee that it threw out the rest of my alignment. And there was a season that actually having to compensate was okay because I needed to protect that by overcompensating. But when it got stronger again, my body had a hard time realigning back to original form because I had so overcompensated. And so I actually, when I went into the chiropractor's office, I was just kind of looking at the posters, and there's either 3 or 4, I can't remember, but neurological hubs in our body. There's mind's one, like around the chest is another, gut, and I think lower abdomen. And there's a lot of new age, like the chakras and all this. And I don't know too much about it, but I realized because a lot of people say God is energy. I don't believe that. God created energy. I believe in Jesus Christ. God created energy. It's a tool. But then I also realized okay, so we have neurological hubs that actually are full of energy. And I didn't know that. And that is an intelligent design on God's part. And so I do know that energy does interact with each other, and energy can do certain things that I'm unaware of. But in terms of spirituality and how that plays into effect, is it affects every area of our being, every area of our fiber. And so, as you were saying, being in alignment, if you are out of alignment, that actually hurts those neurons to be able to fire, to communicate with the rest of your body. And that's the same thing with the idea of the whole person. When you are out of alignment in one of those areas, it creates I shouldn't say it creates a pathway, it deadens pathways from being able to communicate actively with all other areas. So I didn't think about that until you brought that up. So thank you. Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. It talks about it. It's called Soul Keeping. It's a fantastic book. John Ortberg, he is interviewing Dallas Willard, who is a theologian, and he's passed now, but it's a fantastic book. Talks a lot about the alignment of your will, your mind, and it's in your soul. It's so good. Highly recommend it.
Cool. Well, I like to end, Emily, each show with the same 3 questions. Okay. You kind of already hit on this first one, but you can pick a different one, a different answer.
Okay.
And the first question is, in terms of self-talk, negative self-talk, what are you currently struggling with?
The one I have to probably struggle with a lot now is like, who do you think you are? I have always been a leader, and it's like I wanted to get old enough to where, because I'm 37, a lot of people think I'm younger than that, but I'm 37, and I would feel like my age limited me, like, oh, you young thing, And so now I'm 37 and I still don't feel old enough. Still get in rooms. And a lot of it is the job that I work in. I work at the executive level of a giant mission organization. And I hesitate to assert myself. I get worried when I do assert myself. I want to speak up, and then you second guess speaking up, just all those things like, who do you think you are to be here? Who do you think you are to say anything? You're too young, you're too this, you're too that. So that's probably the thing I struggle with the most right now.
What's the best decision you've ever made? Can't say Jesus and can't say your husband.
That's hard. The best decision I ever made was committing myself 100% to the growth of my soul.
Good answer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What is growth of the soul? All right. And then the last question, what brings you peace?
Running. Running brings me peace. It's a way to get all of the energy, like you talked about, the negative energy from being on electronics all day long, from being in meetings that are crazy. It gets it out of my body. That helps bring me peace. Music, singing. I have my great grandmother's piano, and sitting down and playing and singing from my heart brings me a lot of peace as well.
Awesome. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. And for those of you that are listening, you can find Emily on Facebook, Emily French. You can go to her website, emilyjfrench.com, and you can get her book called Run for Your Life. It is an ebook, and you can sign up for that. Emily, is there any other thing that you'd like to add or plug before you go?
Just that part of what I do, part of my life is also called the Priceless Project, which is there's curriculum on my website there's 3 different sets of curriculum that's for girls working on their self-worth. And that program was originally created for the public school system here in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And there's been a couple thousand girls that have gone through that program. And now we have the curriculum being used in Kenya, some in Orlando, and then continuing some here in Oklahoma. And we'd love to see that being used more broadly. So would love to share the curriculum and what's going on there too on my website.
Perfect. We'll go check it out. Emily, thank you so much for coming on today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.